Okay, let me introduce our special guest tonight. First of all, I think most of you know Scott by now. Scott McKinley, who has been with us for over a year since we started working on the audio book of She Loves You. Look at that. Can you believe he had to do an audio book of that? That's amazing. 183 voices he had to do for this audio book and did a brilliant job. And I am picky. I'm not, somebody from Mandeville. All right, Tish. Great. I do not like John Lennon impersonators. In fact, most of them really annoy me. Scott is John Lennon and Brian and George and Ringo and a million other people. He did such a great job. The way that I got to know about Scott was that he did Lennon, the Mobster, and the Lawyer for John's dear friend and attorney, Jay Bergen. And he sent me a free copy. I was blown away. I listened to it reticently because I did not think that it was going to be, I was like, oh yeah, John Lennon, another one. It was great. And this book is phenomenal. And if you haven't read this book, it's all new John Lennon material that you haven't heard before. It's not a repeat of the same old, same old. So, Scott, we are thrilled to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Nice to be back. Thank you.
We are so happy to always have you participate. And Scott found you some jewels tonight that you're going to love. He really worked hard and came up with some cool stuff. So you'll see that in just a few minutes. Also with us tonight is Terry Crane. Terry, you all know from his rivaling Chuck Gunderson longest title in the history of Beatles books. NIMS and the Business of Selling Beatles Merchandise in the U.S. 1964 to 66. Great book full of wonderful stories about the Beatles products. This is not a price guide. This is stories about all the things that you guys own and used to own. It is a trip back in memory lane to everything that you love. So if you don't have this book, you must have it. And his brand new book, Copywriting the Beatles, which at this point is an online book, but he's getting ready to put out a hard copy. He is a busy man. He does on our Alexa, or she'll butt in if I say her name, app. He has a daily Beatles news podcast. Terry, tell us the name of your daily app that you do.
We have one that This Week in Beatles History, and one is Daily Beatles Facts.
Yes.
That's what they are.
And it is, I mean, can you imagine doing that daily? He's a busy guy. Thank you for taking time to be with us, Terry. Thank you so much. And the star of the show, who I hope is hearing us, I don't think she's hearing us.
It's freezing too.
I think she's froze.
Is my sister, Lisa Southerland Allen. She is going to be at the Chicago Fest. Lisa, wave. Everybody wave to Lisa. Can you hear us? I don't
it's frozen. The screen's frozen.
Oh, well, hopefully she will be able to get her.
But I put closed captions on so I can read it.
Oh, okay. Well, my sister is going to be with us for the Chicago Fest, and I wanted all of you to meet her. Hey, Terry, Lily, it's so good to see you.
And hello, everybody.
There she is. My sister has done so many things. Where do I begin? I've lived in 32 cities in the last 40 some odd years. And I've seen Christmas decorations and home decorations everywhere, and none of them even begin to compare to what my sister can do decorating wise. But the important things in her life are that she homeschooled her son for many, many, many years, was a great teacher, and really devoted her whole life to making sure that he not only got the education, but the foundation that he needed. She's a great mom. She loves life. She loves people. And quietly, without making a big splash about it, she changes lives daily. Always happy, always in a good mood. See, she's in a good mood right now. She can't even hear us talking to her. So we are so glad to have her here. And Lisa, so if and there you have it. And there you have it. You're gonna want to meet Lisa at the fest. That's all I have to say. She on Instagram, she has two pages of her decorating tips. One is called Pumpkins.
4 pages.
4. She's pumpkins to eggnogs or eggnog, pumpkins to eggnog. Lisa, tell them the other.
It's hearts to sparks. And I can't even remember the third one. Lord, I don't know, child. You just got to follow it.
2 out of 4 ain't bad.
Okay, I love it. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for
Outrageous expressions.
What? You what?
You what?
I don't know. Andy Nichols, are you here tonight? I don't know if Andy made it or not. I hope so.
I
He
believe
is.
he
Oh,
is.
he is.
I think
And
he said I am.
of the Two Legs podcast, we are so honored to have him with us. Andy and Tom Hunyadi have a great podcast. It's a Paul McCartney based podcast, but they were sweet enough to include this John Lennon girl on their podcast. And let me tell you how nice they are. We were going to talk about a birthday that Paul and John shared together. And I was like, oh, it's going to be the 21st birthday, which John doesn't come off looking quite so good. But no, Paul's 21st birthday, they chose John's 21st birthday instead. When the two of them went to Paris, had a great time together. That was such a sweet thing to do. And their podcast is fabulous. He's going to be at the Chicago Fest. You don't want to miss it. My editor, Janet Davis, MBE, is here. If you don't know, that stands for Most Brilliant Editor. And my agent, I just absolutely love both of them. Nicole Michaels, I don't know, if you're going to write the book, you have to sell the book. There's no use writing it if you're not going to sell it. So thank you to Nicole for all she does to make sure that the book gets out there. Okay. If you've been with us for the last 2 years, and some of you have, we have been going through the new book that's coming out in March, Some Forever. We went to the Hollywood Bowl and San Diego, 1965, with Ivor Davis. Ivor and Kathleen Kaiser, who was the president of the Beatles fan club in San Diego, took us there, and we enjoyed that concert. We went to Shea Stadium, and we enjoyed that concert. We went to the Mania, that was Chicago, and we had fun there. Then we came back, and we went into the studio to make Rubber Soul. Bruce Spicer came and shared Nowhere Man with us. Jim Birkenstadt came and shared Run for Your Life. We went through the LP and all the recording, and then we went to Buckingham Palace to accept the MBE, and that was lots of fun to be able to participate in that. But we are now at the point where the Beatles are going to wind up the recording, thank goodness, because I am not a person that knows a lot about the studio. And being in the studio for 1 solid year, I have been researching and writing the making of Rubber Soul, and I finished it last night. And they are getting ready to go on the Homeland tour. So the Homeland tour is the first crack that you see in the Beatles' shiny veneer, because they did not want to go on this tour, and they almost didn't go on the tour. So on Friday morning, 30 July, 1965, the news went out. The Beatles were no longer going to be at the beck and call of the fans or the press. Wow. They were going to do no personal appearances. And why? Because they sincerely felt, or at least 3 of them did, and I bet you can guess which 3 those were. 3 of them felt that they were being overexposed. Here, and these are their exact quotes. Here's what John said to Brian. Fans can't even walk down the street without us staring at them. It's at a saturation point, really. George said, it's been Beatles, Beatles, Beatles. We need less exposure, not more. And Ringo said, and you might want to remember this, even I'm sick of us. Records, books, films, interviews, radio programs, shows on the telly, bits in the news. Brian said, yes, I know, but personal appearances are crucial. Well, that one Beatle, and you all knew who it was going to be, who was not sick of touring, had this to say. It's not the public. It's not that the public's tired of us. It's the way we're being portrayed. Things are changing, Brian. The direction's moving away from poppy stuff, like "Thank You, Girl," "From Me to You," and "She Loves You," and we need to change as well. That is from the end of the last book. So if you read the last book, you know what happens. They cancel their UK tour. Well, the fans were not happy. Annie Laurie of Harrogate said, "Those boys have gotten too big for their boots. I'm not going to spend any more of my hard-earned money on their records." Yikes. And another fan, who wasn't quite as mad, but was really sad, said, "The Beatles have always been my life, but now I'm starting to rethink." They didn't like it. The fact that they went all over the world in 1965, but now they were going to cancel the people who put them there. They were going to cancel the tour that made them what they were. So we're going to go back and take a look at what happened with the Homeland tour. Rand, he's got a PowerPoint that he has worked so hard on. You won't believe, you're going to love it. We'll bring it up. All righty.
I can't. It's not my thing. There it is.
Here we go, guys. The Beatles 1965 Homeland Tour. NIMS, 13 Monmouth Street, London, 3:45 p.m. Because so much revenue was always spent on the North American tour each year, the Homeland tour was always closely budgeted. In 1964, for example, the Beatles had consumed most of their meals on the Homeland tour in cramped, unkempt dressing rooms, their faces only inches away from weathered backstage mirrors. They had been called upon to economize. This year, however, with the boys on edge about the inconveniences of touring that, as Ringo put it, knocked you out in the end, Brian had made allowances. The upcoming trek through Scotland, Wales, and England had been reduced to only 9 dates in 8 cities, thus alleviating both the burden of expense and the discomforts of living on the road. Well, Brian handed them each a typed itinerary as the boys settled into chairs, John roosting on the edge of Brian's desk. "Here's the official schedule, boys." Ringo took an extra copy for Maureen, and then he handed a second copy to John for Cynthia. As their eyes scanned the memo, John narrated the docket aloud as if he were reading a radio script. "Friday, December 3, Odeon Cinema, Glasgow. Saturday, December 4, City Hall, Newcastle. Sunday, December 5, Empire Theatre, Liverpool. No house on Monday, free day to visit family." "Right, yeah, very good," Paul commented. "Yes," Brian smiled hopefully. I wanted you all, quite naturally, to have time with your families, Merseyside, well, especially in light of the season." "Me mom will be over the moon with it," Ringo nodded. "Mine too," George said. "Hey, Lisa, I can hear you." "Liverpool," John mused. The engagement worried him. The Beatles never practiced their songs these days. They'd have almost no time to rehearse even before setting out on the road. "We can't do a bad show when we come home," John voiced his concern. "The audiences there are our biggest critics. They've seen us develop over the years. They know when we're bad." "Right," Paul shrugged. "But John, we know those songs." John cut across him, insistent. The Liverpool fans made us, and I'll never forget it, you know. I'm certain all will be well, John, Brian interceded. Remember, you'll have 2 performances in Glasgow, 2 in Newcastle. So by the time you reach Liverpool, you'll be, shh, John chided. You're interrupting the very flow of information, Eppie. And John's fears calmed. He dipped his head back over the itinerary and read on. Tuesday, 7 December, ABC Cinema Manchester. Wednesday, December 8, Gaumont Cinema Sheffield. Thursday, December 9, Odeon Cinema Birmingham. Friday, December 10, Odeon Cinema Hammersmith. Saturday, 11 December, Astoria Cinema Finsbury Park. And Sunday, December 12, Capitol Cinema, Cardiff. Yes, if you'll notice, Brian was doing his very best to win the lads over. We'll all be back in London by the evening of the 9th, really only 1 week's journey from beginning to end. He was lobbying for peace. Both tour promoter Arthur Howes and Brian felt that personal appearances, those face-to-face moments with the fans, were integral to success. And that's why they had reinstituted the tour. But only weeks earlier, John had told American reporter Ivor Davis that increasingly they all despise touring. We're getting into a shitty rut, John had spat, and George felt much the same. When it came to touring, most of the Beatles had had fucking enough. In 1965, they had traveled to the Bahamas, to Austria, and Salisbury Plain during the filming of Help. Then they toured France, Italy, and Spain on the spring and early summer European tour. And they had just returned from a 10-day, 2.5-week stint in North America. And now this. Begrudgingly, Brian conceded the excess, but nevertheless, he felt that personal appearances were absolutely necessary, and the tour was back on. In an effort to placate the boys somehow, Brian had handpicked some of their favorite cohorts to serve as Homeland traveling mates. Spunky Beryl Marsden roused a yay when her selection was announced. Beryl, born Beryl Hogg, had grown up in Liverpool's Toxteth area, not far from Ringo's home. And then she moved to Wavertree when she was 7. She attended Earl Road Secondary Modern School, but far more interested in music than academics. She'd shrugged school off without an ounce of regret and started seeking her career elsewhere. One night in Oral Park Ballroom, some friends had pulled the petite brunette towards the stage, and then the undertakers had hoisted the feisty Baird up to perform. Belting out Wanda Jackson's "Let's Have a Party," Beryl had set the punters on their ears and even impressed the band. For weeks afterwards, 15-year-old had been invited to travel with the undertakers, and in each venue, Beryl was a splash. However, sadly, when the group departed for a long stint in Hamburg, Beryl, who was by then just barely 16, had very unhappily been forced to stay behind, waiting for a break. Well, in 1963, John's mate, Bill Harry, who staunchly championed Beryl, had invited John for a drink. And he had asked after a Lennon-McCartney song that Beryl could record. John, who fondly referred to Beryl as the Mighty Might, had quickly offered her Love of the Loved. But Beryl, who was managed by Joe Flannery, was not a NIMH star, and Brian had stubbornly insisted upon gifting Love of the Loved to his own Cilla Black. Each time I look into your eyes, I see that there heaven lies. And as I look, I see the love of the love. Love, which is basically a McCartney track, is a great song. And you can see why Beryl wanted to record it. So she was disappointed, but she was also determined. And she settled for another cover tune, I Know You Don't Love Me No More, which was written and recorded in 1961 by an American R&B star known as Barbara George. Marsden's B-side on that record was When the Love Light Shines, which was a minor Supremes hit. Sadly, neither one of those songs charted for the talented and attractive tomboy. But let me tell you something. Back then and still now, around Liverpool, I Know You Don't Love Me No More was a big hit. Spinning everywhere, word of Beryl's popularity spread, and she was invited to Hamburg to the Star Club, beginning her ingenue stint there shortly after her 17th birthday. Now, just weeks ago, Beryl had released a single originally on the Columbia label called Who You Gonna Hurt? And her manager informed Brian that Capitol had picked it up and another potential hit, Music Talk, would be forthcoming in December. With Who You Gonna Hurt scaling the New Music Express charts and a second song in the offing, Brian jumped at the chance to showcase the spirited Scouser on the Beatles' 1965 Homeland tour. John knew Brian well enough to realize that Beryl's invitation to join the tour provided Eppie with the ideal opportunity to woo the feisty singer away to the NIMS stable. However, John seriously doubted that Beryl was the NIMS type. One manager referred to Beryl as bloody-minded. John had seen it for himself. Beryl's personality was as powerful as her voice. For example, if Beryl were booked for a gig and she decided for one reason or another she didn't want to go, she'd just lock herself in her apartment. Once, when she was booked on a television program in Germany, Beryl reluctantly arrived at the airport and then refused to fly. And even the persuasive British Airways staff and the police could not force the girl to board the plane. She knew her own mind. There's no fucking way that Marsden will ever kowtow to the emperor, John thought. Bold, insouciant, completely unique, Beryl made her own way, and John admired her. Now, catering to the boys' hometown connections to make the 1965 tour a joy for the Beatles, Brian also selected two other Liverpool acts. The Kubas, K-U-B-A-S, recently rechristened the Koobas, K-O-O-B-A-S, and one of their favorite people, Steve Aldo. The Kubas, whose roster had navigated lots of personnel changes, had just released a cover song on Pie Records called Take Me for a Little While. Earlier in the year, the song had fared really well for lovely blonde American star Evie Sands. It got to number 114 on the Billboard charts. But the Kubas, well, the Kubas were neither blonde nor lovely, and they pinned their hopes on traveling with the Beatles to propel this version of Take Me for a Little While to the top.
been trying to make you love me, but everything I try just takes you further from me.
Now, the Kubas and the Beatles had much in common. They were both, well, even their covers had a lot in common. They were both fast friends with Bill Harry. In fact, Bill had secured the Kubas their first gig in Hamburg. Both bands, in their own time, had worked alongside easygoing, affable Rory Storm on the Hamburg circuit. And Brian just felt that the chemistry between the Beatles and the Kubas would be congenial and relaxed and would kind of make the tour into sort of a homecoming party. But by far, the Liverpudlian traveling mate most requested by the Beatles was Steve Aldo. He was born Edward Bedford, and he came into his own at, get this, age 13, when he performed with the Backyard Kids at Pavilion Lodge Lane. The next year, Bedford was singing along with the Ivy Benson Band on the Isle of Man when, as one success led to another, he befriended one of Liverpool's most successful Black artists, Howie Casey. Howie saw great potential in the kid, and he recommended Bedford to Joe Flannery, who agreed to manage him and suggested a stage name for the lad. So Bedford evolved into the sleek, shiny-suited, cuff-linked Steve Aldo. Now, for a while, Steve Aldo was reticent to risk it all on music. He dabbled in other things. For example, he trained as a hairdresser in Cardiff, and then he worked in London on staff at Raymond's, aka Mr. Teasy Weezy. But after a while, music lured him back, and after a short stint with Liverpool's Nocturnes, Aldo joined the Griff Perry Five. Finally, a few months ago, Aldo had released a gritty, crack-in-the-voice cover of the 1963 Holland Dozier Holland number that had been a big hit for Marvin Gaye, Can I Get a Witness? Backed by the Decca label, you remember Decca, the one that said guitar groups are on the way out. Aldo's song had scored in the UK, and John, Paul, George, and Ringo had applauded his success.
Listen, everybody, especially you, girl. Is it right to be left alone by the one you love? Never fall. I love too hard, so my friends sometimes say, and I believe, get a woman that loves that way. Well, it hurts me so inside. See her treat me so unkind. Somebody somewhere, tell her it ain't fair. Can I get a witness? Can I get a witness? Can I get a witness?
But well into October, however, Aldo's name still hadn't appeared on the official prospective list of opening acts for the Beatles' 1965 Homeland tour, and the lads were browned off. John had rung Brian, and Brian, Arthur Howes. Arthur, where's Steve? Brian's voice held an edge. Why isn't his name on the boys' Homeland opening acts roster? Well, Howes had cleared his throat. Well, Beryl and the Kubas are signed to my agency, Brian, but Steve isn't. So, yes, but the boys, Brian had emphasized the word, the boys want him on the tour, Arthur. I'm sure you understand. Yes, of course. Howes had capitulated, suppressing a sigh. I do. And almost overnight, Steve Aldo signed on the dotted line, and he was officially part of the Beatles' Homeland tour. Up the pool, Paul chanted when Brian shared the good news with everyone. The 1965 UK tour was trending heavily scouse. Even George was starting to think that this tour might be a bit of good fun. Now, one recent addition to the Parlophone family recruited for the tour was the Marionettes. The four of them had only been together 1 year. But in that time, they had been featured on the BBC hit television show Ready, Steady, Go, and Brian Matthews had them on Saturday Club. When Brenda Lee had toured England in 1964, the Marionettes had been invited to fill an opening slot for her here and there. And then last July, Parlophone had deemed them successful enough to record their own version of the Drifters' hit, Under the Boardwalk.
When the sun beats down and melts the tar up on the roof, and your shoes get so hot, you wish your tired feet were fireproof. Under the boardwalk, down by the sea, on a blanket with my baby, where I be.
I actually love that version of the song. The Marionettes had a pop soul sound that really appealed to UK fans. In fact, Brian liked them so much that he had recently booked them on his autumn tour called Star Scene 65 with Cilla Black and Billy J. Kramer, the Everly Brothers, Paddy Clausen Gibson, really good tour. And watching them from the wings as the Marionettes had given delighted audiences a sneak peek of their 14 November release, End of the Day, Brian decided that the Marionettes were ideal for the Beatles pre-holiday shows. They weren't just talented singers, they were charismatic. Now, there was only one prospective opening act, the Paramounts, who did not come from the north of England. They weren't from Liverpool. They weren't from anywhere in the north. But with Eppie as their manager, the Southend-on-Sea Essex group seemed like family. The Beatles had known the Paramounts for years. In late December of 1963 and early January of 1964, when, yes, John, Paul, George, and Ringo claimed #1 in America with I Want to Hold Your Hand, the Paramounts were doing something pretty cool too. They were busy becoming a household name in the UK with their version of Leiber and Stoller's Poison Ivy. It was released on Parlophone, and the song went to number 35, not bad, on the UK charts for weeks.
She comes on like a rose, and everybody knows. She gets you in touch. You can look, but you better not touch. Poison ivy, poison ivy. Late at night while you're sleeping, poison ivy comes a creeping around.
Unfortunately, now the Paramount's new release, Blue Ribbons, featuring brilliant keyboard work and vocals by Gary Brooker, was really failing to gain traction. So Brian was hoping that by putting the group on the Homeland tour, it would boost the record's lagging sales. But he had another reason for asking the group along. Outgoing Gary Brooker, Robin Trower, Chris Copping, and Barry Wilson were just as friendly and easy to get along with as they were talented. Audiences were going to love them, and he was hoping that the Beatles would love them as well.
Today I went downtown for just to look around, and I passed the window of Tiffany's. As I stopped to look inside, I wish that I could buy my baby one of those diamond rings and lots of other fancy things. Oh, as I walked on down the block.
Now, in the winter of 1965, these young aspiring boys were just climbing the ladder, and no one guessed that this new and promising band would someday morph into, with a few personnel changes, Procol Harum and give us the remarkable hit, A Whiter Shade of Pale.
feeling kind of seasick. The crowd called out for more. The room was humming harder as the ceiling flew away.
And also, Robin Trower would emerge as a powerhouse in himself with the unforgettable Bridge of Sighs. Now, there was still one more group to complete the 1965 Homeland Tour opening acts, and the lead singer of this group had been a friend of the Beatles since July of 1963, when his early group, Denny and the Diplomats, had opened for John, Paul, George, and Ringo in the Plaza, Old Hill. Now, these days, Brian Hines, aka Denny Lane, was lead vocalist and guitarist for a group called the Moody Blues. With Mike Pender on keyboards, Ray Thomas on flute, harmonica, and vocals, Clint Warwick on bass and vocals, and Graham Edge on drums and vocals, the five-piece combo had a unique sound that was garnering attention on both sides of the Atlantic. In fact, in March, Brian had been asked to, from London, interview Lane and his Moody Blues as they appeared on the American hit TV show Hullabaloo. That evening, the affable and articulate Lane had won Brian over. And as you watch this video, look for Brian in the far right corner.
I guess by this time you all recognize that music. It's called Brian's Theme. And it means that we're all set to go to Hullabaloo, London, and the man who turned down a job as manager of the Bank of England because he was already managing a bank called the Beatles, Mr. Brian Epstein and the Moody Blues.
Recalling that Go Now had held the #1 slot on the UK charts for weeks beginning in January of 1965, Brian decided he was going to bring them into the NEM stable. And so in September, he offered the Moody Blues management. And by October of 1965, they were signed for the Beatles' Homeland tour. Yeah, we like the Moody Blues, George had divulged to a reporter. We've always been good friends. They go down well with the kids. Their style's different to ours, but they follow the same trends. And the Moody Blues, like the Beatles, right back. All things considered, the Homeland tour was shaping up to be rather festive. Popular compere Jerry Stevens, who was a mimic, in fact, he mimicked the Beatles, a singer and a comedian, and who had been hosting road tours since 1963, was chosen to present what you're going to hear from Lisa in a few minutes, was a raucous winter show with ecstatic swarms of longtime fans. Brian and Tony Barrow had done all they could do to make this end-of-year tour as much a celebration for the Beatles as a chore. I'm sure you'll be interested to know that for once, we're not bringing along an entourage of reporters. Brian now iced the cake. You'll be traveling with Alf, Neil, Mal, Tony, and myself. That's it. Of course, all stops are out to provide adequate protection. Each promoter along the way and the police are by now well acquainted with what it takes to provide a steel ring of security. Officers on horseback, outside the theaters, detailed plans for your entrances and exits. We've had their assurances. Yeah, but did we get that telly in our dressing rooms, Eppie? John piped up. Yes, John. Brian shook his head, trying not to smile. It was an unheard of luxury, but one the Beatles had become accustomed to in the States. UK promoters deemed a backstage television awfully extravagant. But for the Beatles, well. And no press conferences, yeah? George raised a hopeful eyebrow. Of course, press conferences. Brian blinked rapidly. In each location, as always. Ah, Brian, Ringo comforted the Ruffle manager. Just pretend you can't hear a blind word he says. He's becoming a bit of a Beatle, our George. Yeah, I can hear that, George retorted. But overall, the Beatles were contented. A short tour, a slate of amiable traveling companions, and hey, a television in their dressing rooms. And pleased with the plans for the upcoming tour, the Beatles suggested tea. Now, in a minute, we're going to hear from Terry because the boys had been deciding throughout the month of November what they were going to use on their playlist, and Terry's going to tell us about that. But first, let's join the Beatles on the very first night of the tour as they are leaving London. They haven't even gotten on the motorway yet. They're leaving London with Alf Bicknell driving them in John's car in his Phantom 5 Rolls Royce because something very unusual already was abrew. Scott R. McKinley is going to bring us Alf's version of what happened that evening.
Some pretty bizarre and wacky things happened on the 1965 UK tour, beginning the very first night as Alf Bicknell was driving the boys to freezing cold Glasgow. Mal had taken most of the equipment on ahead in the van, but there were still a few guitars that wouldn't fit into the van, items that Alf would have to fasten onto the car in which he'd be transporting the boys. "It's bad enough," Alf commented in his Beatles diary, "having to worry about the boys in the back, never mind what's tied onto the boot." Bicknell had a lot on his mind, besides the speed limit, that is. Here's the true, stranger-than-fiction episode that followed. "This is the night I got chased by the police. The thing is, we used John's Rolls with the black windows. We were the first people in London, that means the whole of the country, to use black windows. I went to John's in the limb that we usually use for touring, the Austin Princess, parked that one at John's place, got the Rolls out to pick him up, and then went on to Claremont Estate, in Esher, where George lived. I picked up George in the car, and then on into town. This was when we had the TV and all the mod cons, a little television in the car, and there was a series on, an early night series, I think it was called Code Name Detective Series, with Ian Hendry. Now, the news story on this incident in the Daily Express says that we were travelling up the M4, which is not quite true, because it was the A3. We were coming from the Claremont Estate in Esher, up through the A3 into town, towards North London, Montague Square, just by Baker Street. We were driving along, and there was this car behind us. I had my foot down, doing about 90-95 on the A3. Parts of it were not dual carriageway, so I'm talking about doing it on a sort of normal single-line road, and I knew we were being followed. It was a Jaguar. We get into Kensington, and John shouted, "That's us!" What was happening was the car behind us, unknown to us, was a police car. They were using the police radio and talking about a Rolls Royce, a stolen car, in front of them. This was being picked up by the TV aerial in the Rolls, and was coming through in the bloody wavelengths. Kensington High Street. They're now turning into the Bayswater Road, Sussex Gardens. And then we turned into Montague Mews. And there was no way out. It was a dead end. And I see this car pulling across the top of the mews, and suddenly a young policeman comes strutting down the mews and says, "Good evening, sir." I get out of the car, not dressed as a chauffeur. I had a pair of jeans and a black leather jacket on, or something. He says, "Can I have a look in your car?" And I said, "No, what for?" Eventually I said, "You open the door." And this young copper stood back in awe. John and George were cracking up in the back of the rolls. The police believed the car had been stolen, when all I was doing was running around picking them up. No doubt it was the speed I was doing, but if I had a car chasing me, they ain't bloody well going to catch me. If they are somebody iffy, I'm having the car away. So we get the stuff in the car. Mal, as I said, had already gone on with the van and all the equipment. There were bits and pieces to come, and because there were 1 or 2 guitars, they all went on the back of the rolls. It was really dark by now, and we get off. On the motorway, there's this flashing behind me, and Richie says, "Alf, there's someone flashing you up behind." And I said, "Yes, I'm aware of that." So I slowed down to see. It's this big lorry, and I stopped. This guy comes up to me and says, "Listen, mate, you lost a banjo back down the road." And I thought, oh no. And Neil comes around to the other side of the car and says, "Oh no, what have we lost? What's gone?" One of the straps had broken, and Neil says to me, "Oh, you go tell them." And I said, "No, you go and tell them." Anyway, I went round and said, "We lost a guitar." The sad end of this story is that the Beatles and crew circled back around and found bits and pieces of George's 300-pound Gresh country gentleman all over the road. The boys had barely motored out of London, and already the 1965 UK tour had begun with a siren and a bang. And there was much more to come.
That photo you're looking at is them on the one night that they rehearsed at Mal's place before they left to go on the Homeland tour. Now, Scott did such a good job with that. Love, love, love listening to it. And he also found you some actual footage of the 1965 Homeland tour. Now, this is not a professional bit of footage. The person obviously has never held a camera before, but you are going to get to see some rare footage actually of the performance at the Hammersmith Odeon 2 nights before the tour ended. Here we go.
Domo. Thank you. And hello, good evening. And we'd like to do a song now. Thank you. You can hear us. And I would like to do something we don't often do. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. We'd like to sing now a song which is our new record here. Thank you very much. Next song we'd like to do is from LP. very much, everybody. Well, just a quick word. This next song will have to be our last song for this evening because. Hello. Yes. So.
Oh, yes.
So, before we go, we'd like to say to everybody here, thank you very much for coming. Thank you, lovely. Thank you. Hey, anyway, we'd like to finish off with a song where you can all stamp again and rock and roll. The song's called I'm Down. You tell everything and I can't see. You can't cry cause you're laughing at me. I'm down, I'm really down. I'm down, down on the ground. I'm down, I'm really down. Well, how can you laugh when you know I'm down? How can you laugh when you know I'm down? Man, boss ring, woman throws it away. Same old thing happen every day. I'm down, I'm really down. I'm down, down on the ground. I'm down, I'm really down. Well, how can you laugh when you know I'm down? How can you laugh?
And there is the program for that evening. It's odd because they chose the Beatles cartoon images to grace the front of the 1965 Homeland tour program. And as you all know, it was being shown in America, but that is the image that they chose. Thank you so much to Scott for finding that clip for us. And huge thanks to Rand for all of this whole PowerPoint, all the collages, all the clips, all the pictures that went along with Scott's narration of Alf's story. Really appreciate it so very much. Coming up, our next focal points will be September the 10th, and we are going to talk about, we have covered every aspect of the Beatles in the latter part of 1965. But what we haven't talked about is the emotional aspect of it. What was going on with John and Cynthia? So we're going to talk about the recording of Girl, and we're going to talk about the relationship between John and his girl, Cynthia, during the latter part of 1965. So we're going to go live now, and we're going to talk first with Terry and then with Lisa. Terry, we heard snippets of their playlist. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, on Wednesday, December 1st of 1965, with the Homeland tour only 2 days away, the Beatles gathered in Mal's flat to put together a set list and then rehearse those songs. They kind of decided on a kind of an unusual collection of songs. They promoted one side of their brand new single, We Can Work It Out. And then they also had on there the flip side, which was Day Tripper, and showcasing only 3 of the songs from their brand new LP, which was Rubber Soul at that time. So John kicked off the show with I Feel Fine, that has that wonderful signature guitar riff that everybody knows and gets in the mood when they hear it. So then we go over on the second song to Paul's She's a Woman. After that, George stands front and center. And he takes out his Rubber Soul song, and If I Needed Someone is what he did. Followed that was Ringo on the amazing cover of the Buck Owens hit Act Naturally, which is always a crowd pleaser. And then afterwards, John returned to the spotlight, and they played Nowhere Man after that. Okay, then him and Paul joined in harmony, the old Beatles for Sale number, Babies in Black. And then John came back on with his raucous title song from the last summer's box office hit. Yes, they played Help then. So then John and Paul partnered to sing the hot new record, We Can Work It Out. Okay, and now at that point, they kind of had a little change of what was going on. Paul then set down his signature bass right there, and he picked up his acoustic guitar, is what he did, so he could do his great solo song at that time from Yesterday. Okay, then when they were done, the Beatles all returned and came back out for Day Tripper, which again had one of those signature wonderful guitar licks in the front there. So now everybody was going bananas, all kind of screams and everything. And the Beatles went right to their last number, the song that had closed those Wild and Wacky 65 North American tours with such excitement by them playing I'm Down. Now, with that characteristic deep bow that followed that song, the boys called it a night. So they had 11 songs, half hour, 30 minutes. And this was for their loving and their loyal UK fans who had a chance to see the Beatles not on some mega stage really far away, like in the US, but in a theater, close up and personal. So Jude, this was their fabulous set for the UK tour. And using another signature chord, I'm coming back to you.
Thank you so much, Terry and Scott. Thank you again for your recording. That was great. It was really great. I enjoyed it so much. All right, we are going to hand it over to the lady with the pizzazz, my sister Lisa. She's going to tell us some of the interesting things that happened on the tour. Go, girl.
Okay, I can't hear y'all, so if you're laughing, just know I can't hear you. Okay, so on the first day, they were in Glasgow. They had to do 2 concerts and a press conference at 5:10. But this year, they had a huge luxury in their dressing room, a TV in their dressing rooms. So they watched themselves miming We Can Work It Out on Thank Your Lucky Stars, and they were not impressed. And then they watched an episode of Lost in Space, and before the second show, they took in The Avengers. That night in the episode was called A Deadly Number. Paul and Ringo lounged on the backstage sofa to watch it. John had to sit upright in a small wicker chair, and George became bored with the show and went over to hang across the hall with Ray Thomas of the Moody Blues. In Liverpool, they were huge headliners at the Empire Theatre, where they had failed miserably at an audition with Carol Lewis on June 9th years ago. Now they were stars, and the audience was special that night. Not only were the original Beatlettes there in the audience, the girls who had made them popular at the Cavern Club, but their families were there too. George's girlfriend, soon-to-be wife, Patty Boyd, was there, and Ringo's parents and George's parents were there. Unfortunately, John's Aunt Mimi was living south of England in Poole, Dorset, and John's sister Julia was in college in the north, so no one was able to bring Jackie along. But so many of his friends and college buds were there, and in true Liverpool fashion, after that very first song, they all got up and danced in the aisles. It was a fitting Beatles goodbye to their hometown and their truest fans. This would be the last time the Beatles would perform Merseyside. And that night, Brian gave them escorts to their houses for a day off with their families. Throughout the whole tour, the wind and the weather was really strange. On Tuesday, they had to drive 33 miles to Manchester, but increasingly thick, horrible fog took the driver 4 hours to get them there. The Beatles arrived only 12 minutes before the show, and they still had to get in their suits for the stage. Things were so bad that night, even after the show, that they had to try and make it to the hotel. The boys found some gas masks and put them on from World War II. And here's a photograph that Jude's going to show.
Okay, well, I don't have it, but I'll post it on Facebook. It's weird. It's the big gas mask that they wore, and you've probably seen the photo, but the fog was weird, really weird.
Okay, that goes right along with me not hearing you. There's the picture. Okay, then 2 days later, fog and heavy rain makes them 10 minutes late for the gig in Birmingham. What's up with the weather? Touring by car was unanimously voted something we're never doing again. The Beatles were used to having things thrown at them, like today. I thought that was only about today, but here you go. They had jelly babies, and in the US, jelly beans, lipstick cases, even tennis shoes. In Sheffield, someone threw a pear at Paul, which hit him just below the left eye. Ringo said, "Take it, Rand."
Another half inch and Paul could have been blinded for life.
How about that? But the biggest surprise of the whole tour was when they returned from their gigs in London. The fans went mad. George said, it's always been the other way around. Sorry, no accent. Scott, can't help it. It's always been the other way around. But fantastic in the north and just a little bit cool in London. But the fans were there and they were not cool anymore. The 3,000 gathered in Finsbury Park, Astoria, screamed like there was no tomorrow. Alan Smith, writing for the New Musical Express, said it was the wildest Rip It Up Beatles performance in over 2 years. The fans went stark raving mad. And at the Hammersmith Odeon, it was even crazier, if you can be crazier than stark raving mad. There were over 200 fainters. The front seats were smashed to bits. And it was Beatlemania times 10. One doorman who had been mauled in the face by fans said, no wonder they ended up going to India. It was the only place they could go and get some peace and quiet. The UK tour was a short one, but it was lively. And anyone who thought that Beatlemania was dying was proven dead wrong.
Yes. Thank you,
Thank you.
ma'am.
I see hand claps. Thank you. All right, guys.
And everyone can understand why Scott McKinley does the voices.
Yes. Scott is definitely, he's got it. Thank you, guys. Don't forget, 10 September, 7:30 p.m. Central. We're finally going to turn to kind of a personal chapter. All of these have been tours and making records and getting the MBE. But, you know, there was a story going on in John's life behind the story. And Lisa touched on it tonight when she talked about the fact that nobody was there for him when he came to Liverpool. Everybody else's family was there and everybody else had people backstage and I'm sure that that Elsie Graves was sweet to John. And I'm sure that Louise Harrison was sweet to John. And I'm sure that, but he was the end of 1965, John was very much alone. And things were not going well in his life. So we're going to talk about that emotional component the next time and the making of the song Girl and what that's all about. Everybody, thank you. Thank you to Scott for being here, Terry for being here, Lisa for being here. It was wonderful. And this guy, how about this guy? And the PowerPoint. See you soon, everyone. See you at the Best for Beatles fans. We will be there.